Okay, hello and welcome back to the Cine Skinny podcast. It is the podcast from the Skinny magazine talking about the films. We're back at Upload Studios in Leith with a whole load of stuff. So I'm going to have to very quickly rattle through introductions. It's me, Jamie.
Hello.
Lewis.
Hello.
And Annie.
Hi.
And we are talking about Dracula in various forms, narcissism in other forms, and also martial arts in unexpected places. Before we get into the reviews, just want to plug the film screenings we have coming up with Mubi. Return to Seoul is on in Edinburgh and Glasgow next week, and then Matinee, the Joe Dante, John Goodman, Cuban Missile Crisis giant ant film, is on next month. Theskinny.co.uk, you can get tickets for all those. We're just going to batter straight into review number 1 because we are in a bit of a rush and Lewis has to get the train back to Glasgow. So first up, it's Polite Society, which is the debut film by Nida Manzoor, who's the creator of the excellent Channel 4 sitcom We Are Lady Parts. So Ria's sister Lena is getting married, and Ria wants to put a stop to it so she doesn't lose her sis, so she embarks on a martial arts powered heist to sort things out. It's a film that Jamie and Annie have both seen. Me and Lewis couldn't, so we watched something else instead. Jamie, what'd you think?
Yeah, this was the closing film at Glasgow Film Festival, and I just totally dug the energy of this film. I actually haven't seen We Are Lady Parts, but this makes me want to go and see it. It's been compared a bit to Edgar Wright's films, and you can see why, because what Manzoor is doing is she's sort of channeling all the kind of grammar and like fun of the films she grew up watching. So Hong Kong action films, there's Western in there, there's thrillers, and she takes all that energy. So you've got the kind of whooshing cameras of Hong Kong cinema, you've got the over-the-top sound effects, you've got the kind of breakneck edits, but it's set in this kind of suburban, quite sort of boring, like London setting of this kind of Pakistani family who are having a bit of an issue between two sisters. So it takes that kind of normal, everyday thing, but just elevates it with all this kind of like cool genre effects, which I loved. So yeah, the film's kind of vitality seems to emanate from Ria, because she's this kind of high-spirited teen with a kind of martial arts obsession and a kind of overactive imagination, and she becomes convinced that her older sister Lena is in danger from her new boyfriend, and we're never quite sure initially if it is just all in her head, because like I say, she has got an overactive imagination. You know, she fantasizes that she is going to be a stunt woman, and she's got, you know, and she's maybe thinks herself a bit better than her skills. You know, there's a lot of fun at the start because she's not quite as good as she thinks she is. And there's a suggestion that maybe she has got her sister's new boyfriend all wrong. And I think what really elevates the film is that it's really funny. It's like a laugh, right? But there's a kind of political edge to it. So as well as being a kind of goofy teen movie, and it's a kind of like Hong Kong style action film, it's also got tons of great ideas about sort of female oppression smuggled in. So, for example, I love the way like Mansoor will employ all these kind of traits of femininity as weapons in the film. So there's like a great like smackdown between the two sisters where they end up using like things around the bedroom as weapons. So like they use like the hair tongs as like a kind of weapon, you know, and things like that. And then later, there's an amazing scene where a torture scene, but the torture is done during a leg waxing, which is before a wedding. so it's like, so it takes all these ideas, and not to give too much away, but the central idea is actually about like female autonomy and like women's bodies, and that's kind of the central premise of the whole film. So even though it's like a knockabout comedy with lots of like fun ideas and playing with genre, it's actually saying a lot about the world today as well. So I just dug this so much. I thought it was like just full of fun and energy.
Yeah, Annie, you interviewed Nida at GFF, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I went there after a party the night before, which I think was very like in keeping with the film. And I think I was really erratic, actually. I think she was a bit like, couldn't quite get my energy because I was so fucking tired. But yeah, I think she's great. I think she does such like an interesting, like with this and We Are Lady Parts, just brings a real like punk sensibility to this kind of film that maybe would otherwise feel quite familiar. Yeah, like there's a lot in this that thematically, that idea of like tradition versus modernity or kind of displacement that we've seen a lot in like kind of South Asian diaspora cinema. But yeah, it just feels like very, very fresh. I agree with Jamie. It's just like really nice. I really, really enjoyed, like the thing that struck me watching it is how a lot of the pressure that is normally kind of put on children by their parents in these kinds of films is actually coming from Ria towards Lena. Like, she wants her big sister to be this like rebel. She wants her to be in art school. She wants her to kind of be herself in like big capital letters. And the pressure that she puts on her sister to do that, to kind of not be like fulfilling this traditional role or not going down this kind of slightly bland path of like marriage and being a good girl, like becomes its own kind of violence. And I think that's actually such an interesting and like nuanced twist onto like these kind of narratives. Yeah, and it is also just like very, very fun. Just a really, really fun sensibility, very silly. Does like lots of very interesting things with genre. I think there's something very interesting in a film that is constantly shifting and eliding genre, like very similar, the Edgar Wright thing, like to, what's it called, Scott Pilgrim, where it's just very kind of meta and intertextual. And the fact that it's kind of using that to tell a story about immigrant and second generation immigrant identity, which is something that is also very elusive and there's also caught between like ideas of performance and authenticity. I just think it's really clever. Yeah, I really liked it. I think her best film is still to come.
Yeah.
Like, I think there is something that is maybe a little bit sharper and a little bit more kind of out there, not only in its sensibility, but in its kind of maybe writing and, like, do you know what I mean? Just something a little bit more. But this is such a like good start, such a good start.
I just felt the film ran out of steam a little bit when it got bigger. So like I think it's really good at the start when it's just dealing with a couple of characters, but then towards the end there's a wedding scene and clearly the production gets bigger, and it feels like she maybe lost control of it, because like it just, instead of being really sharp, like having a joke every second, the jokes were every kind of couple of minutes, you know, and then it felt a bit looser.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of people running around sort of doing crazy stuff instead of being like really smart, funny, incisive. But yeah, like super talented. Like for a first film, I think is a knockout, actually. One of the best kind of debut
for sure.
like in terms of kind of mainstream film as well. You know, obviously we've had things like After Sun, and you get like quite often these kind of like you know, very small intimate films, but to do a kind of big movie, because this is it's an indie film, but it's actually trying to be entertaining, you know, if it will entertain a mass audience, and I think that's kind of pretty cool.
It's an indie film, but it's trying to be entertaining. Don't worry, this is one of those indie films you get that's no fun.
Oh, you know, no.
There are so many of those. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No disrespect to like any smaller film, but it's literally trying to please everyone. It's like it's trying to be
mainstream.
It's just trying to be a great time at the movies. Like I'm sure that's how she went into this, but like I say, she has smuggled in lots of great ideas, but it's just a blast, you know.
Yeah, when I interviewed her, she kind of was saying that like this was just me making my dream film, and you really get that from it, that she was just like doing everything that she wanted to do. And I think there are times, like especially towards the end, like you said, when maybe it's like you could have reined that in or like nuanced it a little bit more, but there is just something so infectious about the very clear joy that she is taking in making her own film. And I think that's just really nice.
So Polite Society is out a week on Friday, if you listen to this when it comes out, 28th of April. If you have a Cineworld card, I think they're doing those unlimited previews on the 24th, which is Monday. But if you want to support the wee guys...
Are we the wee guys? Who's the wee guys?
Well, the wee guys, like independent cinema.
Oh, I see.
Not want to support us. Continue listening to the Cine Skinny podcast. But if you want to support independent cinema, it is out from the 28th of April. Polite Society, very good. Go and check it out.
And we should say, if you want to read Annie's interview, you can read it in...
You can read it twice.
There's two versions of it. So you can read it in this month's issue of The Skinny, but also in Indie Cinema Guide, which is the new publication we've put out, and you'll find that kicking around various venues throughout Scotland.
Yeah, you will.
Textbook plug. 10 out of 10. Next up is a film that me and Lewis watched in lieu of Polite Society. Sick of Myself, which is a new Norwegian film by director Christopher Borgli. So Sinja is a barista in Oslo in a not particularly healthy relationship with a contemporary artist called Thomas. When he starts to get a bit of fame and success, she sets off on a narcissistic voyage powered by some dodgy Russian anxiety medication that she bought on the internet to try and get the attention that she deserves. So me and Lewis watched this, and Lewis, my God, sweet Jesus, these two characters are bad for each other.
I mean, I kind of wish I'd seen Polite Society, I'm not going to lie. I there's stuff that I didn't like about this film. I'll just get out of the way with what I liked. It has an incredible tone, so it's kind of like a drama comedy. The comedy comes from these like crazy little vignette fantasies that she has, where her funeral is so big that people need to get stamped on the wrist by the bishop before they get into the cathedral. Or you know, there's one where she has a fantasy that she'll get caught out in her web of lies, and the doctor diagnoses her with being a dick. Points out that
Sorry,
was that an ill-timed
my protein shake?
ill-timed sip. But the drama comes rather from the fact that like her obsession with garnering sympathy is depicted really brutally. As you've pointed out, she goes on these like dodgy Russian pills that have been known to cause a skin disease, and it gets all very Cronenbergian. It's actually like quite thrilling, really, because it's the first time in a long time that I've seen like good body horror be done in contemporary cinema. But you know, and like, you know, the scenes themselves always go in interesting directions. That's the thing, like these little fantasies. The film starts with this couple sort of having dinner in this like fancy bougie eatery, and I was thinking, you know, if I have to watch one more like really snobby couple snip at each other after Triangle of Sadness and after The Menu and stuff like that, I'm gonna lose it. But it turns out, you know, they're sort of being really reckless, and they're not actually paying for this bottle of wine, and they're running away with it. And so though they are deeply dysfunctional, these little episodes of their downfall always like play out in interesting ways. But I think it kind of runs out. It runs out of steam, really. Like, as she gets more and more obsessed, the plot becomes more and more predictable, because we know that whatever she wants, you know, the unending adoration of everyone around her, she's obviously not going to get that. So it just becomes this sort of like, I don't know, case study of Munchausen syndrome or, you know, narcissistic personality disorder. And the film doesn't really take a stance on it. It can't seem to decide whether the audience should be sympathetic to this person or if we should hate her, which is just a really strange stance to take on like a real life mental illness that people are diagnosed with and that you've made the sole subject of your film. So I think lots of people will like it because, like I say, all throughout it's got great humor and it's got great drama, but it definitely left me feeling a little bit odd and unsure of where I was supposed to land on it.
Yeah, one of the things about this film, and shout out to Cine Skinny contributor Ayanna Murray for possibly starting the discourse that on Letterboxd of saying that this is what Julie thinks she is when she says she's the worst person in the world. So, like, because obviously this film is Norwegian and it has kind of like Nordic design sensibilities and lovely soft cinematography and the golden hour constantly, this film is getting compared a lot to Worst Person in the World. You know, this is Worst Person in the World if David Cronenberg directed it. This is Worst Person in the World if there was a terrible fly-style accident and Joachim Trier and Lars von Trier got mixed up and somehow they got transported into each other's films. But the difference from this to a film like Worst Person in the World, Worst Person in the World is a romantic comedy, and there is nothing romantic about this film. This is a film about terrible people who are actual pricks to each other constantly. Like, the lead senior is embarking on this kind of, narcissistic crusade to get attention and to be loved by people. She fakes having a nut allergy, then forgets midway through the lie that she has it, and then has to act up in order to, like, re-commandeer the conversation. I wanted to turn my body inside out. I was literally watching this scene from behind hands, like I was trying to protect myself from incoming fire. And she's clearly, like, had a very rough time of it. The kind of catalyst incident to the whole thing is that a woman outside the cafe that she walks in gets attacked by a dog, and she kind of helps and does first aid. But she does first aid and then leaves and goes home on the tram and then walking completely covered in blood and is just constantly staring at people in the street, expecting them to just say, "Are you all right?" And I think that, like, she is not a particularly sympathetic character, but crucially is always still has agency in what she's doing. It's just that she is constantly making bad decisions and doing things you shouldn't do. Thomas, the contemporary artist who is the partner, is a dick, and I hate him. His art's rubbish. It's just loads of chairs. This man's got so many chairs. This man is out here with chairs, and he doesn't care who knows it.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing. Like the fact that
I like the way that was what I gave you to work with. It's like I'm gonna say chairs 5 times in a sentence, and then just turn to Lewis silently and expect to roll
off of that. I mean, I think what you said about like how all of the characters in this film are completely morally bankrupt. Like, yes, they are all complete dicks. They're all really up themselves, and that really. I don't know, it does make it for... I think that's why so many people will enjoy it, because whilst it's certainly not relatable because it just goes to such extremities of obsession, it's definitely, like, understandable. Like, it is, I guess, slightly sympathetic that she obviously has this compulsion to draw attention to herself, but at the same time, she really should just, like, get a better social life, because none of these people are good for her or themselves. So that does kind of explain things a little bit, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely jet black. As Lewis said, there's body horror elements, kind of surrealist elements, really cringy elements. The doctor who diagnoses her off a CT scan with being a terrible person is played by Anders Danielson Lee from Worst Person in the World.
Who is a real doctor.
Qualified medical doctor.
I love that.
Yeah, this film is absolutely chaotic. Fashion, slammed. Contemporary art, eviscerated. Dogs, slandered, and then redeemed, strangely. Journalism, mocked. Men, bad. Women, different kind of bad. Still pretty dreadful. In this film, no one really gets away without being drawn into this web of kind of contemporary art, fancy, Scandi, Nordic living bullshit. But there's one person at the front, and it's Senior, covered in her bandages, honking on so many off-brand Russian anxiety meds that make your head spin.
Yeah, I think that if you fancy yourself like a fan of cringe comedy, this is going to be like the ultimate test, I think. I think that it bats so randomly between Schadenfreude, where you're really enjoying watching this person suffer, and cringe comedy, where you're really hating watching this person suffer.
It's the Sickos meme, but as a 90-minute film from Norway.
This sounds like my own personal hell.
I don't think you'd enjoy it. I'm not gonna lie.
No, I don't think I would either.
Well, if you identify more with me and Lewis in this conversation, then it is out this weekend, Friday the 21st of April. I think the GFT have got it, and it'll presumably be on somewhere in Edinburgh. And it's the kind of, it feels like the kind of film that'll do like the rounds at various indie places like DCA and Cameo and things like that. So, Sick of Myself is out on the 21st of April. If you like cringing at people and shouting at the television, go for it. Although if you shout at the cinema screen, they might get you in trouble. But you never know. Just say you're playing along. All right, and third, a film that I have not seen, so I will pass over very quickly. Renfield, which is the new Nicholas Hoult and Nicolas Cage Dracula film. It's the Dracula film. Anahi, help me out. Tell me a bit about this Dracula film.
It just clicked for me that
not
they're
the
both called
Dracula.
It is Dracula.
Dracula's in it, but it's iconically not Dracula. It's the other guy.
Well, it is the other guy, but Dracula is also in it. I did literally watch this 2 hours ago, but I'm just going to quickly look up the plot summary. Excuse me 1 second. So this is basically looking at Renfield, who is like a minor character in Dracula and is like his little lackey, right? And I've read Dracula a million times and I don't remember Renfield.
I don't think he's actually in the book. I think he's in...
He is in the book, yeah.
Is he?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I think he is in the book, but which actually on a meta level just goes to show that this man has been like very neglected.
He's the person who's eating the bugs who lets him escape the asylum.
Excuse me, I'm thinking of Igor. Igor from Frankenstein is famously the one that was added, right, in the Hammer horror films.
Yes. But anyway, so Renfield is in the book and he's like his little lackey, and this imagines basically if he has like continued to be his lackey like into the present day, they're kind of they haven't died deathless. What is that called?
Immortality.
Thank you. I'm so tired. Like they're these immortal beings, and he's played by Nicholas Hoult, and then Dracula is Nicolas Cage. It seems to be a world where someone has written the novel Dracula, because he keeps being like, "Oh, my master is Dracula," and everyone's like, "Oh, shut the fuck up." So I don't really know what that's about.
Unless it's like a historical novel rather than a...
Yeah, maybe like a documentary. So I don't know, but. Yeah, it is kind of set in the present day in New Orleans, and it's basically framing it as he has like this toxic codependent relationship with Dracula, who is his boss effectively, and he's trying to get out of it. Listen, this film is dumb as shit. Like, it is pure candy floss cinema. There is no nutritional value to it whatsoever. It is just vibes, and the vibes are not like that great. Like, they're good, they're fine, but they are like a little bit recycled. They feel like they've been spinning around the machine forever. There's like some grit in them. Is that hard candy floss? Well, I actually don't know, but it feels like
I thought you were describing the vibes machine.
No,
Someone's got
candy
grit in the
floss.
vibes machine again.
The candy floss machine. Anyway, but I did have like a nice time, and maybe that's because I watched on a Monday afternoon when I was meant to be in the office. So you can say,
You watched it today?
yeah, I watched it today.
I wonder where you were.
But I am genuinely such a fan of Nicholas Hoult. I have been a fan of Nicholas Hoult since About a Boy. I think it's so nice when he does his little shtick. I think he actually might be, ironically, like Hugh Grant's like inheritor. And that he is just like this very bumbling Englishman, and he's just like very charming and very funny about it. And I think he's just like such a good, like in The Great, he's so interesting. I fucking hated the menu, but like, you know, he was like serviceable in that. I just think he's like a nice time, and I really enjoy watching him. But like, yeah, other than that, like it is just a bit whatever. Like, I will never think about this film again after today. But that's like, while I was watching it, I was like, haha, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
you know?
I went in with extremely low expectations.
Yeah.
I don't even think I'd seen like a full trailer of it, but I'd seen like the posters and stuff like that, and I just thought, like, there's What We Do in the Shadows, which is a very good film about, and a series about like juxtaposing vampires and how sort of sinister they are, with like, oh, they've got to do their laundry, or uh-oh, there's a line at the bank. Like, What We Do in the Shadows did it well, and I just wasn't particularly thinking that like this could be anything new. It is kind of, it's doing its own thing, and I think that just having such low expectations, I was kind of pleasantly surprised. Like, the action is just nuts. It's like wire fu with CGI blood. At one point, Nicholas Hoult fully bisects a person and tears someone's face off. Like,
Oh, I hated that.
I mean, it's just nuts. Like, good. It's like actors I did not expect kept popping up. So like Ben Schwartz is there, and he's like got pretty like famously great comedic timing. So he's really helping out that quite weak script.
And he's also canonically Iranian in
Yes,
this film,
because
which
he
I
is
loved.
he's the son of Shora Agdashlu,
Which is
who
great.
I also did not expect to see, and then she shows up, and we're having a great time. So they really give it a go. And of course, there's like, I think we should talk about Nicolas Cage, who is just like giving it his all, of like being a sinister little evil, like conniving, monstrous maniac. And like he's just putting so much into it. He's practically begging you to laugh along to the humor of it. And yeah, it kind of got me at some points. And maybe it's because he looks the part, and he actually is like really like dressed up the proper Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi way. Like the production value looks great, but he's got like a full set of complete fangs in his mouth. So you can kind of like barely hear what he's saying, but he's just being incredibly camp. So yeah, I mean, like, I think that if you want to sit in a dark room for like an hour and a half and maybe laugh a couple times and be slightly entertained, this is a good film to suggest. But
Jamie has his arms fully crossed.
Yeah.
Jamie is cross.
I think this is the worst film we've reviewed on the podcast.
Oh,
I think
that is nonsense.
No, it is. And do you know what's worse? Why I'm so annoyed about it is because it was such a great premise. Like, the actual premise of the thing is amazing, and it's such a missed opportunity, because I agree that Nicolas Cage is fantastic as Dracula. I agree that Nicholas Hoult is a very funny actor who can be great. But the film does not take the premise and run. For the first 20 minutes, it kind of has some good ideas. I love the idea that Nicholas Hoult accidentally goes to this self-help group at a church for people with like terrible relationships, and then he goes there to hunt for Dracula, but ends up hanging around because he realised, actually, I've got a toxic relationship. That's funny, but it burns through those ideas in the first 20 minutes. There's also a lovely flashback where we learn about Renfield's and Dracula's past, but they shoot it like a old Universal picture, and it looks like they've maybe composed it on scenes from the kind of 30s Dracula with Bela Lugosi, and that's all really funny, but then they forget to do any of that later on, and so they burn through all these great ideas, and then it becomes the stupidest, most inane action film about a mafia family in New Orleans. Aquafina's there for some reason, and there's some sort of police corruption going on, and she's also trying to have like a relationship with Renfield, even though the actors have no charisma or no chemistry whatsoever. It was just so disappointing that for the first 20 minutes, this is a great setup, and then it just completely falls apart. Nicolas Cage, I don't know what was going on. Did they not have him for enough time? Like, if he's not in the film that much, and he's by far the best thing about it. Like, it's weird. Usually, with like action films, like you get bored between the you're waiting for the action to happen. I was the complete opposite. I was waiting for the action to stop because the action was terrible. I was waiting for, can you tell me a joke again? But it just didn't happen enough. It was just like, we'll have like 20 minutes of Nicholas Hoult ripping people's arms off. And Aquafina Cop, like, mentioning it, says, you just ripped somebody's arms off. And he said, yeah, that was the joke, over and over again. She said, oh, you just decapitated a man with a plate. Yeah. And like, that is not, it was funny the first time, but after she said that joke 5 times, I was just like, please, can this stop? And it's only a 90-minute film, and it felt so long. I cannot, yeah. I was really disappointed. But it's mostly because I really like the cast, and I just think, it's a wasted opportunity. And the thing is, I would probably go and make a sequel because I think, but this has potential to be great.
Yeah, it does.
If they had someone who was like talented behind it all, but just the people who worked on this, even just from a technical point of view, there was I was spotting like edits were wrong. There was match cutting not happening. Like some of the action scenes were just like messy, you know. And I think maybe part of it was also we just watched John Wick a few weeks ago. That's a film which is beautiful. It has beautiful choreography, beautiful action scenes. And this is just an ugly movie, just like with not enough ideas, really.
Can I also say, and like, sorry to be that leftist,
Yeah.
but I thought the cop thing was weird.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that Aquafina being a cop and then the kind of corruption, but like whatever, and like avenging her father thing was just uncomfortable. Like, it is just uncomfortable these days. And I think especially when like it's a comedy and when the humor is kind of based on operating beyond the law and this very extreme violence, I just found it uncomfortable to watch a cop basically perform police brutality for like an extended amount of time. And I just don't think it was necessary. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, she could have literally just been like a civvy. He could have been like a lawyer. Like, it could have been anything.
Yeah, I was interested to see what Aquafina would do in this film, and I kind of felt like she was sort of just trapped. Like, you're right. The fact that we're following this like New Orleans crime family that have this like mother-son relationship and their like crazy penthouse apartment, that's all like completely ridiculous. I kind of expected something like that going in, but I felt like this intrigue with Aquafina being a cop and she's trying to avenge her father, that was like a third degree of detachment from the source material here. So when I disagree when I heard the idea that they're doing this like Renfield with Nicolas Cage's Dracula. I didn't think that sounded like a good idea. I thought, oh, they're probably going to make an absolute mess of that.
I think the idea is like your literal boss is a monster is a great idea. It's like what I thought of it as like The Devil's Wear Prada, but Meryl Streep is Dracula. I thought that was a great idea for a film.
That is a great idea for the film. But I think that the vibe that I got from it a lot more was that it was kind of like as to vampires what Zombieland was to zombies, which is kind of like we're well past the point where people are trying to like do interesting things with the idea of zombies. Let's see if we can get a semi-good zombie film out of a semi-good comedy.
Yeah. There's also the weird thing, like nobody... Like, Renfield is meant to be like an endearing character, but literally he's assisted the murder of possibly thousands of people over, how long's Dracula been around? I don't know. Millions of people? I don't know. I feel like maybe that should have been dressed somewhere in the film, that this guy has helped murder. I mean, did he murder? Actually, I wasn't too clear if he murdered the people for Dracula or if he just like...
No, I think I don't know.
Anyway,
He like chloroforms them.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he does seem... He has like remorse. And
What is this film that you're all describing? Is this real? Am I being punked? What's going on?
Anyway, I just thought it'd be nice to have a sliver of morality. Maybe he could feel like... Oh, is that crazy?
Sorry. It's just like very applicable to so many things in life.
Can I have a sliver of morality?
Just gonna like make that my ringtone. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I just was disappointed.
But you know what? Even though he said all that, he still said he'd go and see the sequel. This
would.
man, that's a man who supports cinema. Okay, so Renfield is out now. If you were convinced by any of that, it's out now, like wide release in UK cinemas. So go and check it out. And then to follow on from that, better, fun versions of Dracula in a segment that I have dubbed Draculads on Tour.
What's the tour?
Let's discuss Dracula and various vampirical lads in a variety of films and television set in various locations. It's not the snappiest title in the world, but we've all gone off and picked out something from the vampire canon that is maybe like a good thing to watch instead of Renfield. I believe we should probably start with Anahit, because I think you went for the original and arguably the only.
OG.
The original, the main man, Nosferatu.
Yeah. What were you going to say? The only what? The only Dracula?
The only Dracula.
Oh, Lewis is not Dracula.
No, I mean like the only Dracula, the only actual Dracula.
But I thought that was Dracula. Okay, anyway, what? Sorry. This is not an interesting
Well, again,
conversation.
Nosferatu is not Dracula because they
Yeah,
couldn't.
he's technically not. But I did find out, like I was Googling it, and Bram Stoker's estate did sue Nosferatu. Like, not the guy.
Also, by the way, the guy isn't called Nosferatu, right? The guy's Count Orlok.
Yeah,
he
he
is a Nosferatu.
Anyway, they sued the people that made it. And, sorry. It's so late. I'm so tired. They sued the people that made Nosferatu.
Yeah.
And they had to like burn all of the prints of it, but then like a couple survived, and that's why we can still watch it. That's the point I was trying to make. So it isn't Dracula, but it also is Dracula.
Yeah.
Listen, yeah. I watched this for the first time also today. I really was not in the office at all. And I thought it was obviously really, really, really good. People kind of say about like Dracula interpretations that like Nosferatu especially is often spoken of as the only adaptation that leans into like the horror elements of Dracula. And I think effectively like inside all Dracula interpretations and adaptations are like two wolves, and there is the horny and the horror. I think this is like one of the few, and sometimes there are both, they can be the same thing, but this is one of the only ones that is kind of proper old like German expressionist horror. Nosferatu, or what was his name? Dr.
Count Orlok.
Count Orlok.
Dr. Orc.
You watched this film today, by the way.
I'm very tired. I've had a very hard week.
It's Monday.
What was his name again?
Count Orlok. Do you want me to write it down for you?
Okay, Count Orlok.
I'm only like 60% sure I'm right, by the way.
It's Count Orlok, yeah, that's right.
Okay, Count Orlok is not particularly sexy. He is just like a weird little guy, and he's just like prowling around, and it just has like a real like horror undertone in it, both in kind of like the visual language of how they've kind of filmed it. There's a lot about like lights, shadows, specters, very spiky teeth. It's very similar to Nicolas Cage. But there's also like this really interesting sense of like decay and degradation through the whole film. So there's like all of these really interesting shots of animals. And like there's this one like Venus flytrap that goes around like a fly, which is like really cool. And just a sense of like a gothic sickness spreading, which I hadn't really seen in any kind of Dracula adaptation before. They are normally, like the Coppola one, like just very sexy.
Well, does he not bring like the plague to England?
I was about to say, it is a really interesting pandemic film, actually, because he brings all of like these coffins over from Transylvania, and they have rats in them, and it just like brings the plague to this like little German town. And this was made in 101 years ago, exactly, in 1922, which would have just been like a few years after the Spanish flu, which I think is really interesting. Like there's a real sense in this film, like a panic about ideas of infection, like the fear of borders, like both the border of the country that can like allow things in, the borders of the self that can allow things in. And it just feels very like, yeah, just very gothic, very, very unsettling, not very interested in Dracula as like this very, very sexy guy, which I thought was, yeah, I hadn't really seen before. That is my pitch on Nosferatu. I'm going to nopal for the rest of the podcast. That's all I've got.
You know what? Solid job.
Thank you.
We all had a lovely time. Yeah, and I think that like the thing about the Dracula / Count Orlok, I nearly said Dr. Utker there. Yeah,
I don't want to say Dr. Orlov. Who is that? Is that someone?
Is that your doctor by any chance?
So the thing about the Dracula story is that it does actually give, because you've got these kind of never really aging, slightly decrepit characters, it does let you do some quite interesting things. The What We Do in the Shadows TV series is a really good example of this, actually, that I want to flag up, because they're like fish out of water in 3 different ways, in that they're vampires with humans, but they're also like weird sort of anachronistic oddballs, and also they're for some reason in like suburban New York. So there's a bunch of guys who are like, like Kayvan Novak's character, is he not from Turkey? He's from somewhere like in that like kind
Is
of.
he not from like a fictional?
He's from a fictional
like kingdom
place,
that's-
but in that
yeah.
like in that part of the world, and he ends up on Staten Island in 2022 with all the fish out of water comedy you would expect from that. But the really interesting character in the TV series, who isn't in the film, is Guillermo, who is their kind of like little helper. And one of the really interesting things they do with him is they make him feel like he's getting older and he's kind of missing out on life. They do episodes where like old familiars come back after like disappearing, and you've got these kind of like geriatric old guys wandering around this abandoned house being like, oh, my master's going to make me a vampire any minute now. Or he's constantly going to these like really kind of depressing mixers for all the familiars. And then they sort of amp this up in the most recent series of it, where Colin Robinson, who is the energy vampire played by Mark Proch, is like he gets to 100 and then dies, but then he is reborn as a baby who like hatches out of this like chrysalis, but he grows up really, really quickly and turns into this weird music hall variety act that like sings songs with Matt Berry on piano. And the explanation they give is because all vampires are kind of like stuck in this anachronistic past time. They all love like 1930s music hall. So, but it's just like, yeah, it does really interesting things. I think you can do really interesting things with like aging and like fear of death. When someone like can't die, they just end up being surrounded either by the same 4 people they can't ever get rid of. It's like you make friends with Matt Berry once and you're paying for it the rest of your life. Or they do this thing where it's like you're on this track of the human life and everyone else around you is on the track of like, well, it doesn't really matter to them what happens because they are the vampire. So that's What We Do in the Shadows, which segues neatly onto what Lewis wants to talk about, because one of the characters in What We Do in the Shadows has the same name as the film you want to talk about.
That's right. I'm going to talk about a film called Nadja, which it's interesting that you bring up the sort of fish out of water, you know, the mundanity of the characters in What We Do in the Shadows in modern day Staten Island, which again is something that Renfield sort of touches on. But Nadja is kind of like an early example. It's from 1994 of vampires in like modern urban spaces. This is an incredibly weird film. The director, Michael Almereyda, has some writing credits that I've heard of, but I've never seen any of his films, so I can't say for sure how like in step with his filmography this is. But the creative touch of executive producer David Lynch is about as subtle as a plane crash. It was filmed on location in nighttime New York using a toy camcorder that Fisher-Price released in the late 80s. It's called the PXL 2000. Fisher-Price released this toy camcorder for a run of about a year production. David Lynch is a fan of it. There's some directors that are really into it. It's bizarre. Everything in this film looks really pixelated. Most interior shots seem to be of this familiar wood-furnished diner from Twin Peaks. Everybody gives like rambling, nonsensical monologues in the same deadpan voice. Peter Fonda wears a tweed suit and has ratty long hair, and there are multiple My Bloody Valentine needle drops. The plot, again, this feels like kind of a David Lynch thing. The plot is not really a thing. It follows Nadja, who is the daughter of the recently slain Dracula, and I have been told that What We Do in the Shadows character was named after the protagonist of this film. She just sort of wanders around New York, like feeding on some people, sort of sleeping with some people, converting with other people, but like every random person we encountered is somehow an illegitimate relative of Peter Fonda's Van Helsing, so they sort of team up. It's weird, but it's cool in a lot of ways. Like they for some reason have used these like really bizarre pixelated shots to like convey intimacy. It's just interesting that like, you know, this is a filter that's on like every, I don't know, Snapchat app or whatever, but back then it was this really, really weird, unique look. And there's a shot where Nadja is eluding vampire hunters, and she's walking down the street in the foreground in real time, whilst the people chasing her in the background of the same shot are running in slow motion. So, like, you know, it's got good cinematography behind it. The cast's homogenous deadpan just like fucks with your brain. They just have like bizarre nonsense dialogue hidden in their interactions just to like test if you're really paying attention. So it's a weird movie, but I think it's kind of cool how they were like, we're going to make a vampire film. Does it need a plot? Does it need characters? Does it need a strong sense of setting? No, because it's 1994 and apparently all the ideas for vampire films have been used up. But if you like Twin Peaks, this is virtually a feature-length version of it.
God bless David Lynch. Just had a look. A PXL 2000 will set you back about 100 quid, and they all say on eBay that they probably don't work. Jamie, what would you like to talk about?
I'm just thinking, is that the same year as Bram Stoker's Dracula?
This was slightly after, I think.
Just slightly after,
yeah.
okay. Yeah,
you can watch it, by the way. It's on rarefilm.com, which lets you stream rare films for free, and is apparently legal.
This does not constitute legal advice.
It says that copyright owners are welcome to just contact the site owner and they'll take it down. So that hasn't happened so far. Nobody tell David Lynch.
No crimes here. No crimes here incorporated. Jamie, what would you like to talk about?
Well, I want to talk about Near Dark, which I think I might have mentioned on the podcast before, but it's Catherine Bigelow's, I think it's her second film. It's from 1987. So like the thing why vampire films I think are so potent, they're kind of very malleable films because people can put on any metaphor of the day that they want. So they've dealt with all sorts of social anxieties and think, you know, there's been films about vampires as queer desire, vampires as capitalism, vampires as drug addiction, vampires as sex, as a lot of them are actually, especially the kind of hammer ones. But Bigelow sort of seemed to be interested in vampires' love and the kind of addiction of love, and also the kind of the loneliness of being a vampire as well was like what she was interested in. So it's about this young couple who meet. It's kind of set in Texas or somewhere. I don't think that actually says where they are, but it's like a kind of Western sort of looking. It's kind of influenced by the Western, and it's like this couple meet. They have a wonderful night together. She bites him. And it turns out that this woman has chosen this guy to be her companion for life, and it asks a lot of questions of what would it be like to live in the modern day and have to eat blood to live forever? How would that make you feel? So it plays with ideas that doesn't really get talked about in most vampire films. So it's dealing with the kind of like, you know, the trickiness of it. So if you're traveling in a couple, or in this case they actually have a kind of extended family, there's going to be tension because you've been together for years and people start to hate each other. So it's dealing with all that kind of stuff, but it's also dealing with like the fact that when you're bitten, it's against your will as well. But that's the idea of love, isn't it? You kind of it's something that happens against your will. It just happens. So it's playing with all those ideas, and I think it's just one of the first films I saw where vampires were in the real world. You know, because I've just been so used to seeing, you know, like say Coppola's version of Dracula, or you know, the kind of Hammer films or the Bela Lugosi films where it's like very camp, it's usually set in the past, it's usually heightened, but this is like was for me the first realist vampire film I saw, and it kind of like knocked me for six. It's like it made vampirism seem like dangerous, and it just gave it a kind of real kind of visceral feel, and I think it's one of Catherine Bigelow's best films. And yeah, it's got a whole interesting look at it, which is something I've never really seen in many other vampire films. The only one that I've seen since that comes close is maybe Martin. I don't know if you saw that. It's like the George A. Romero film. It's about a young lad. Again, it's very ambiguous of whether he's a vampire or not, or just a kid who's sort of watched too many vampire films and read too many horror novels. And he sort of thinks he has to drink blood to survive. And I think it's a syndrome that some people have. I think it's actually called the Renfield syndrome, when people think they are vampires.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called, coincidentally enough. But what makes it so shocking and such a great, powerful film is it's like very gritty. It's shot like an indie film. Just to go back to that phrase. And I think those films, to me, like have stayed with me a lot more than those vampire films, which to me, the kind of Dracula films, I don't really love any of them, to be honest. I can't say like I was much more of a Frankenstein guy or a Wolfman guy. I thought Dracula wasn't that scary, but I think part of it is because they've made him this kind of gothic, like romantic figure. But actually, these films that put him in the real world or put vampires in the real world, I think are much more kind of powerful.
And I think there is something as well about like the book of Dracula. I think is like one of the best novels ever written, and I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that we're just like not on his side at all. Like he's this figure that you don't really see at all, and he's like very otherworldly, and like that bit where he like creeps out of the ocean like towards like Whitby, like the ruins of Whitby Castle, like is just such a like fascinating image, and just everything in it about like female sexuality and like the fear of like the violation of the female body and like innocence, and it's so interesting, but it's kind of a cipher for those things rather than Dracula as a figure. And then I think what happened when like cinema became a thing was they just became very obsessed with that kind of Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, like Dracula himself. And I think it's kind of thing with horror, right? That horror is scarier when you don't really show it. And I think a lot of like Dracula films have just like shown him, and that hasn't really I just haven't found them like as scary or as compelling or really done what I think the book is so good at doing.
But also, am I not wrong in saying that like what's so thrilling about Nosferatu is that even though it was intended to be an adaptation of Dracula that didn't work out and had to be sort of turned into this original character, it's the first original vampire in like modern fiction, and as such has kind of paved the way for all the other films that involve vampires, like Interview with a Vampire, which also deals with stuff like the idea of converting people into vampirism as some sort of family unit, but that all stems from the fact that they just couldn't get the rights to adapt Dracula.
Yeah.
So Nosferatu could have very much have wound up being kind of like what you're describing, and it unfortunately kind of lifts the veil on a character that's otherwise mysterious, but in fact it's just building up this other new interesting character.
Yeah, and it's kind of situating it within like a kind of social and political setting that isn't just obsessed with the figure of like Nosferatu or like Dr. What the fuck was his name?
I was just about to say.
One last time.
You know what I mean? The guy, the creepy little weird little
Dr.
guy.
Orlok.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. No, Count Orlok.
Oh no.
Fucking hell.
God damn it.
Anyway, you know what I mean. I keep trying to make these points.
He's only got a master's degree.
Okay, that's it. I think we're done.
As good a place as any to end. Cool. So I think that's us all done for today. So thank you, Anahit.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thanks to Callum and Ethan at uploadstudios.co.uk on the boards listening to that. So delightful stuff. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. If you've enjoyed the pod, tell your pals, subscribe. And if you want to come to one of these screenings of Return to Seoul at the CCA or Summer Hall next week, then the skinny.co.uk/tickets is the place to go for those. But for now, we are going to go home. So bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.